Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are so glad you could attend this panel on an incredibly important topic, feeding potential, the role of food banks and school meal programs in addressing childhood hunger. I'm Vicki Clark, Vice President of Development at the Global Food Banking Network, one of the co-sponsors of this event, alongside our partners at Kellogg. Before I bring in our panelists, I need to cover some quick housekeeping details. Interpretation is available. Make sure you select your language preference using the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen and select Spanish or English. After our panel discussion, we'll take questions, so I encourage you to submit your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any time. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. Lastly, this session is recorded and is on the record. As we discuss how to address childhood hunger, it's important to take a moment to frame what's going on in the world right now. This year, we have seen food, fuel, and fertilizer costs rise rapidly across the globe due to a disastrous, interrelated set of issues. We're seeing unprecedented inflation. Officials from the United Nations are calling the confluence of events a perfect storm and the greatest cost of living crisis in a generation. We know that food banks are effective and powerful because they can assess and address the most pressing needs of their community members in real time, especially during crises. Children are particularly vulnerable to crises like this one, in part because poor nutrition can jeopardize the health and development of young children and impact their physical and cognitive well-being well into adolescence and adulthood. More than 350 million children face the reality of extreme poverty, and that means facing hunger every day. Food banks play an important role in addressing this life-threatening issue through school-based feeding programs. Many children around the world receive their main meal of the day through a school feeding program, and last year, more than 13 million children were served by a GFN partner food bank. In addition to alleviating hunger, these programs have important secondary benefits, which we will hear about shortly. However, there are still significant gaps in these crucial programs all over the world. That's one reason it's so important to support initiatives like these, as our partners at Kellogg are doing. And it's why it's important to support food banks, which extend the reach and effectiveness of school meal programs. Today, we'll hear more about those programs from our distinguished panel, and I'd like to introduce you to them now. Stephanie Slingerland is Senior Director, Philanthropy and Global Impact at Kellogg Company. Stephanie is responsible for leading and implementing the Kellogg Company's global food security cause platform, Kellogg's Better Days. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie. Ana Catalina Suarez Peña is Latin America Regional Director at the Global Food Banking Network. Ana Catalina serves as the relationship manager and point of contact for GFN partner food banks in Latin America. And prior to joining the GFN team, Ana served as executive director of Bancos de Alimentos de Colombia for nearly 6 years. Great to see you, Ana. Juan Pablo Ruano is project manager at Desarrollo en Movimiento. Juan Pablo helped design and implement the business plan, one of GFN's key partner food banks in Guatemala. Since then, he has been in charge of the overall performance and operations of the food bank. Welcome, Juan Pablo. Karen Alabon is Manager of National Programs at Food Banks Canada. Karen has worked at Food Banks Canada for 3 years with a focus on child hunger as the project manager for the After the Bell program. Welcome, Karen, and thanks for joining. Thank you all for agreeing to share your insights with us today. Ana Catalina, I'd like to start with you first. Your work spans widely across food banks in Latin America. What kinds of school meal programs have been effective in Latin America? And can you share some examples of best practices, how we can expand the scope of this work?
Hola Vicky, un saludo para ti.
Hi, Vicky. Greetings to you and to everybody that is with us today. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about this very important issue. And in the midst of this huge crisis we're living, affecting those who need food the most. In Latin America, we have 17 countries, 19 members, more than 200 food banks. The programs that we're working with are divided in three different types of programs. We have school feeding programs, and that is even before kids get to the educational institution. So we have several institutions that serve children even before they get to school. Remember that breakfast is one of the most important moments for feeding a child during the day. So the child needs to have breakfast before getting to school, and that is fundamental for the learning process. The second one is those organizations that provide food after school, things like lunches, dinners, snacks, or mid-afternoon snacks. This is very interesting because it's two separate types of institutions. And they also offer extracurricular activities to the children. They tutor on different issues, math, Spanish, biology. On top of that, they support, and we have to take into account that in Latin America, 49% of homes are headed by a woman, by mom. So when you have a woman as head of family, those are women that have to work two or more jobs. So these institutions, these agencies also take care of the children as women finish their two or three different jobs for the day. And the third, and not less important, is food supplements in the schools. This is food, and what happens is you offer the food to the school so that the school delivers those to the children. It could be breakfast, it could be a supplementary feeding that goes along with the main meals. It could be lunch. Sometimes it could be the mid-afternoon snack. So basically, that is the way we work, and this is throughout the region. And let me add that Latin America has been leading the early childhood programs. Also, in the framework of these early childhood programs, you serve children between 6 months and 6 years of age, and this has become very important as well. So we have we have daycares and educational institutions that take care of these children, these very young children, and food banks also support these institutions as well.
Thank you, Ana. Juan Pablo, let me turn to you. So, based on what we've just heard, can you tell us about how the cost of living crisis is affecting the work that your team is doing to curb child hunger in Guatemala? What are the main challenges that you're facing? How have these school meal programs been important in your work?
Bueno, primero que nada, muy buenos días a
Well,
todos.
first of all, very good morning to all. Thank you so much. It's truly very important to talk about nutrition in Guatemala for us in Desarrollo en Movimiento. Guatemala has a lot of challenges in nutrition, and unfortunately, we are one of the top countries in the world for this. So these programs of education and feeding for children, we serve two different regions, one in the north that has indigenous population, 100%, and then the population near Guatemala City. And we have this inflation period right now, very high cost for food, and we've had a lot of challenges. One of the main challenges that we face is some of the donors that used to donate food so that we could supplement breakfast. And that is one of the things that we do. We provide breakfast to the institutions so that they can serve breakfast to children. Some of those donations have dwindled because of the crisis, and we have had to make like direct requests for donations, for instance, milk, so that we can serve their needs. And second, this is very important because one of our centers is very, very far, and we are having to purchase most of the food to be able to serve the indigenous population. And the increase in cost and the increase in the transportation costs has been very, very important. And we are going through a period that some of the products have gone up to 35%. Eggs, as an example. This is something that has really affected us. We've been able to move forward. Anyway, we have been able to get these products. We have had to pay the cost in transportation so that we can visit those far areas. But this has been a challenge. It has really affected us, and it has affected the operation of school breakfast. But we've been able to feed the children that we had to feed. It is fundamental for all of us to be able to maintain this program and to make it larger. As I mentioned to you, in Guatemala, one of every 2 children suffers from chronic malnutrition, and the impact that we've had through this program has been very, very good, very important. In the Samak area, we've been able to go from 55% children with malnutrition or at risk of malnutrition. After 2 years of having this program in place, we've been able to lower this to less than 20% with the same risk. So this is fundamental for us. Also, in the other educational center that we work with near Guatemala City, for instance, we've been able to decrease this to less than 15%. We're talking about the population of with low weight or under risk of malnutrition. So our intervention, even though it hasn't been huge and we haven't been able to do everything we want to do, but it has had a huge impact. And it is a huge pride to be able to do that. And GFN has really supported us, and they've been able to help us maintain these programs, and we want to make it even larger. Our children in Guatemala need this type of programs. The most important thing about our programs, on top of making sure that children reach their normal height and weight, we want to stop children from leaving school. Dropping out of school has been a problem in Guatemala, especially during the pandemic when it has gone up. So we've had even an increase in international migration due to the pandemic. So this is one of the programs that we want to increase. We want to make it larger, and we want to work with these populations, and working with them helps us change the future for these children. And little by little, we really can attack the problem of malnutrition in Guatemala. We are not experts, to tell you the truth. We haven't been doing this that long, these school programs that we've been implementing, but this is the most important work that we're doing. This is what we think is the most important work that we're doing, and the one that has the biggest impact on the population that we're serving. It has really filled us with satisfaction. And even though it's just a small, a small part of what we're doing in Guatemala, but we really want to maintain the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. It's clear how important this work is. Karen, so building on this information we've just heard about Guatemala, can you tell us about how the cost of living crisis is affecting your work, the work that your team is doing to address child hunger in Canada?
Yeah, thank you for having me as well. And good morning, everyone. Yeah, as you can imagine, the cost of living crisis and food inflation in particular is leading to a large increase in demand for food banks in general. And we know that that's impacting kids and families in particular. At Food Banks Canada, we work with a network of about 700 food banks and hundreds of other organizations that are fighting food insecurity. And what we're hearing is the cost of living crisis is just putting increasing pressure on them. All the staff and the volunteers that are working there are struggling because they're seeing an influx of new clients. So it's a really difficult time. And it's putting a strain on them financially as well. Like Juan Pablo mentioned, we're also seeing a decrease in food donations. And so that's also driving cost increases for us. Not only are food costs going up, but at the same time, as donations go down, we've had to purchase more food to continue to offer the programs we do. So in terms of our child hunger program here at Food Banks Canada, we offer our After the Bell program. And through that program, we're really focusing on summer hunger. So when the schools are closed and those school meal programs aren't available, there's a gap there. And so that's why we started the After the Bell program a few years ago. Last summer, we sent out 175,000 healthy food packs to close to 200 communities across the country. And so they're distributed at food banks. The kids can come pick up the packs once a week. They get a variety of healthy snacks and meals in the packs, as well as fruits and vegetables. And they know they have that food. They can take it home with them. And it's for them. It's easy for them to access and prepare. So it's an important program for the kids to know that they have that resource every week. And at the same time, we're hoping that we're taking some of that stress and pressure off of the parents who are often having a hard time in the summer to provide. But as I say, we did send out 175,000 packs last summer, but we know that the demand is much higher. And even before the cost of living crisis, we weren't really able to fully meet that demand. And so that's a concern. And at the same time, in Canada generally, the child poverty rate has gone down in recent years, but still across our network of food banks, or the food banks that we work with, 1/3 of the visits are from children. And so that's still really a high number of visits, especially considering that 20% of the population is children. So they're really overrepresented in terms of visits to food banks, which is a concern. And seeing this inflation and the cost of living crisis, the concern is that's going to just increase or really push families over the edge into poverty. So it's something we're watching carefully and very concerned about.
Thank you so much, Karen. That really highlights and speaks to some specificity of the global stats we mentioned at the top of the hour. I really appreciate the framing around the cost of living crisis that's impacting the service delivery there too. Stephanie, let me turn to you now. I have a couple questions for you. First, can you talk about the types of initiatives that Kellogg supports to help food banks and children? And second, what additional social benefits have you found with school feeding programs?
Sure, thank you. And such a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Thank you for convening this really important conversation. So, at Kellogg as a food company, we understand how critical it is that people are fed and fulfilled. People cannot be successful, children cannot be successful in school if they are not fed and fulfilled. And so we recognize the critical role that we have to play and have supported feeding programs for children for over 2 decades in partnership with amazing organizations such as the Global Food Banking Network. We do this through what we call our Better Days Promise ESG strategy, through which we are working to increase sustainable and equitable access to food. So, we've been doing, like I said, these programs for more than 2 decades. We're now doing supporting this work in more than 20 countries because you've heard it this morning, how critical it is for children to get this important nutrition to be successful. But, as I've had the opportunity to visit many of these school programs and, talk to teachers, administrators, and others, I've always been struck by, of course, the important nutritional elements that these programs provide. We've talked about that. But there's more to these programs as well. As you think about holistic well-being, your physical, your social, your emotional well-being, these programs are really critical in providing all of those elements to children and to families. For example, I visited a school where the school nurse actually was there distributing food to kids as they came into the school in the morning. And I heard from that school nurse that because the kids got to know her, they felt more comfortable coming to her for other social and emotional problems that they might be experiencing, in addition to physical concerns that they might have. So we took a look, we wanted to dive into this topic a little bit more at Kellogg. So we actually conducted a literature review last year to look at the social emotional benefits of feeding programs for kids. And it found, some research that definitely confirmed what we were seeing in practice. So we did some new research this year. We're actually just releasing it this week. We talked to teachers and administrators and parents in 5 countries around the world about the benefits they see from these programs. And it's true, children have a greater sense of belonging, a greater sense of identity and connection when they are part of these programs. But, as we're talking about the stress that families are facing with, increased pressures during this difficult time, these programs are so important for families because they know that their children are going to go to school and receive that meal. So in addition to knowing that they're going to have their physical needs met, there's a sense of relief and taking a bit of that stress off of families and children to know that they have that meal waiting for them at school. So that's, I think, just even so much more in this time, showing the absolute critical need for these types of programs.
Thanks, Stephanie. We appreciate having that kind of better sense of how school feeding programs are having an impact on the well-being of children. Juan Pablo, what are the main challenges then impacting the expansion of your school feeding programs? What support and partnerships do food banks need to keep these programs running and effective?
Muchas gracias, Vicky. De
Thank you
nuevo,
so much, Vicky. And again, the main challenges that we have for the future for these children is, first of all, to make sure that we can provide this food to the children. So we need donor funds so that we can expand the program. And the programs, it's really complicated. We have requests. In Desarrollo Movimiento, we always say that we have a very limited supply and a super high demand. So we really have to choose very carefully what we do because the needs are huge in a country such as Guatemala. So what affects us is the ability that we have to be able to serve all these programs and to be able to grow at the same time. We have received many requests to work with educational programs in a huge number of communities, indigenous communities, faraway communities, in rural areas, far away from the urban areas. We work a lot with the rural areas. And on top of the need for funds, we also have something else, and it has to do with cultural partners. We have over 22 different indigenous groups in Guatemala from the different ethnic groups, and you have to adjust, you have to adapt, and you have to belong to those areas that we work with. For instance, the Quechua populations, we've been able to develop like a special menu so that we can work with those children, because not all children have the same availability of food. They're not used to the same type of food compared to children that live in urban areas that eat more Western food. So that is a huge challenge because we have to be able to use local ingredients so that these children feel comfortable and feel okay with the breakfast that we serve. So that has made us be there. We need to be present and we need to be part of the area. So really it's that kind of program helps us know our country better, to understand the diversity of our population and to be able to develop ways in which we can serve them. Desarrollo Movimiento has to grow these programs and we need to serve the most vulnerable populations.
Hmm.
Y
Thank you,
solo
Juan
para cerrar,
Pablo.
a mí me gustaría que en lugar de tener estas dos comunidades,
Karen, what are some of the main challenges then impacting the expansion of your school feeding programs in Canada? What are the support and partnership needs that food banks have as well?
Yeah, thanks. So I just I would preface this by saying that Canada is one of the only OECD countries that does not have a school meal program that runs nationally. So many of the food banks that we work with and many other organizations offer these breakfast and meal programs in schools, but they're really stepping up to fill that gap without a consistent level of support across the country. So that's a challenge in itself. When it comes to the After the Bell program specifically, we're very lucky to have a number of very committed donors and corporations and other partners that step up to support the program every year, including Kellogg, which we're grateful for. But at the same time, this program is complex, and we are we need support in multiple ways. So it's not just funding, but we also making sure that we have food to fill 175,000 packs is quite an undertaking in itself. So accessing that food either at a discount or if we can get donated food, that's amazing as well. But also just the logistics behind the program, because we're shipping out these packs to 200 communities across the country. We're a big country, and that includes reaching underserved and higher needs communities that might be more remote. This year, for the first time, we reached 5 communities in Nunavut where packs had to be flown in to every location. So it is a large undertaking, and again, we're lucky to have supporters that have helped us with trucking and all different aspects of the program. But at the same time, because of this crisis in terms of costs rising, it's a concern that we want to be able to maintain the program, provide the same level of nutrition and food that we've always provided. And in fact, we want to be able to grow the program. And the concern is without sort of increased support, that's going to be very hard to do. We've seen our budget increase this year. And so we're just working really hard to make sure that we can maintain the level of support that we've always done and continue to build the program a little bit if we can, because we know there's a need out there. So that's sort of the focus for us right now in terms of partnerships.
Thanks, Karen. Anna Catalina, let me come back to you at this point. So given the current context and the challenges facing food banks, can you tell us more about what GFN is doing now? And then how can companies like Kellogg and others partner with us to ensure that these critical programs continue to reach more children?
Vicky, gracias. Y gracias
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Juan Pablo and Karen, for everything you said, because this is what we all have been living in the whole Americas. And of course, Stephanie, thank you for the support that you are providing. Currently, GNF offers to our members support 3 ways, which are very important. One, technical assistance. So that we can provide more and better food programs, school programs through our equipment of childhood support and feeding, but also that we can develop a better capacity in our food banks as a non-profit organizations that can really meet all standards, high standards in the government, high standards in under the financial administrative point of view, and also in managing human resources, but also and especially in the way we handle food within food banks. And this is a topic that is more and more relevant, has always been, but now it's even more, because we understand that today we have a lot of that associated with the lack of proper management of food. And so the higher the country, the higher the communities, the larger the communities we are supporting, the higher the probabilities that we can have this type of problems. So the way we relate to our beneficiaries. We offer technical assistance so that we are more and more focused on our customers, and our customers are the people we work for. But additionally to all this technical assistance, Vicky, that we provide from GNF equipment, GFN equipment, we also provide in supplying resources, identifying their needs, specific needs, so that they can improve their social school food programs, for example, offering, of course, topics, infrastructure in inequity topics, and providing more food, more donors. And Juan Pablo said, this is our challenge. We need more money, more resources, more products, so that we can actually meet the needs of our population. And so we need more resources. And lastly, but not less important, the management of partnership. This is very important to find allies at regional level that will join us in our school meal programs, volunteering their knowledge, their know-how. What does it mean? People that devote their knowledge from the financial point of view, inequity, and to the food bank, so that we can grow together. So these are the three main topics that we are working with our allies and with our partners. And so to go back to your question, Vicky, if you are listening to us, companies that maybe they do not produce food, but maybe they are financing companies, and that today they are very concerned because it's not only their own workers have lost the purchase power impacting their living. We know that there are many companies that they have, but many of their workers are living in poverty and extreme poverty. So maybe there are companies that, in addition to really care for their employees, wanted to make a difference to other people. Food banks are the best way to do it. Donate money, of course. I'm not ashamed to say that we need money. We really, Karen said, and Juan Pablo said it, we do need to purchase food. In many cases, donated food is not enough. So if we want to improve the support that we provide, we need to buy food that will impact the nourishing capacity of the people we tend. Otherwise, we are going to lose cognitive capacity. Losing cognitive capacity, a vulnerable population, reduces the education levels as well as their income power. And so this is a vicious circle. So if you are listening to us and you are a company that want to do something to face the crisis we are going through, please donate money, donate food, and not food, and donation of human talent, of know-how. We have a great area to work for volunteers, companies that have the know-how that we can use for the benefit of our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Catalina.
Gracias.
This is a time when we would move to questions from the audience, and I see several here. So we'll see if we can get to at least a few of these now. Ana Catalina, you mentioned the importance of volunteers. So let me start there. For Karen, tell us about how food banks can depend so heavily on volunteers. What strategies are food banks in Canada deploying to attract more volunteers with increasing unemployment and in the post-COVID pandemic economic recession? Tell us a little bit about that and how that works in Canada.
Sure. So, I mean, volunteers are really the backbone of the food bank system here in Canada. So they're very important. And during the pandemic, we lost a lot of volunteers, especially here. A lot of our volunteers tend to be seniors. And so they weren't interested in volunteering during that time, understandably. And although some have come back, not everyone has. So depending on volunteers continues to be a challenge. I know some of the food banks are trying different things, like having volunteers come at different times of the day, because maybe they can't come during the day now if they've got a job, but they're offering services where volunteers can come and support later in the day or in the evening or even on the weekend, which is a challenge in itself. But that's sort of one of the strategies I've heard. I think one other challenge is like getting someone to come consistently. So they, here in Canada, we have different, recognition programs and things like that, just making sure volunteers know how valued they are and having the chance to sort of interact with the clients that they're serving and understand the need and how important it is that they get involved.
Thank you. We have a question for Juan Pablo. This is a question from Mike at No Hunger Food Bank in Nigeria. Right now, his food bank is only able to provide limited breakfast for the displaced children as part of a school meal program. His question is, how can we address the issue of school meal programs given limited resources, especially among internally displaced children?
Bueno, muchas gracias por la pregunta.
Thank you very much for the question. Really, this is a challenge that we ourselves have to face. We know that food, it's more important than many other things. We always train parents of children involved so that they can implement a better nutrition decisions for their family. Sometimes the lack of food is also the lack of nourishing food. So I always say that it's important to try to find funding programs so that they can allow to have a better food program and to have better options and more availability of nourishing food for the population. So this is a very challenge in African countries and in Guatemala, where the children malnourished rates are very high, but we needed to do baby steps. We cannot try to do everything at the same time. And we needed to try to really work with our own competences, our skills to really serve these populations and try to train the people that we can so that we can meet the best we can those needs.
Thank you. So we've heard clearly the need for support and partnership. Stephanie, from a CSR perspective, what are some of the ways that partners or prospective partners who are listening to this could help push child hunger as a priority in their companies?
Yes, thank you. Well, I love so many of the things that Anna Kathleen actually said around volunteerism, leveraging the power of corporate power or the corporate partners and the powers that we can bring to help with these issues, in addition to funding that we might be able to provide to increase these programs. You know, a couple of things that I was thinking of as she was speaking was also the power of private-public partnerships in advocacy. So, you know, a lot of what I'm hearing, you know, talked about today is how we can ensure that these programs can be sustainable. So how can we join in partnership with organizations like Global Food Banking Network to help advocate for the importance of these programs beyond just what we as one corporation can provide? How can we come together as a collective to ensure that these programs remain sustainable, because they're so critical? I mean, and we talked about this, it's a cycle, right? If we're not ensuring that children and families are fed and fulfilled, it has economic impact, it has education impact. And, you know, we need to make sure that we're building ourselves to be most successful going forward. The other thing that I would say to corporate partners is that I think we have a very powerful voice. You know, part of our Better Days ESG strategy, in addition to, you know, ensuring that we're helping people get access to food, we're making sure there's enough food for everyone, supporting farmers, you know, it's also about how we can use our voice. And so we've actually created goals and how we can engage people in this important issue. So events like this, how can we get more people to hear about these critical issues that our communities are facing so that they also can come alongside and support it? So how can we put messages in on our packages? How can we work with retail partners to bring things in store so we get these issues in front of our consumers so that they can see them and understand them and then also want to engage? So I think there's a lot of ways that corporate partners can be engaged. You know, and that also includes the volunteerism and creating advocates among our own employees as well.
That's great. So for anyone, this is a general question, is there any evidence or other talking points that you can share that policymakers and advocates can use to call for increased funding for school meals and to design programs that serve children?
Vicky, yes, I'm sorry. Sí, Vicky, perdón.
Yes, Vicky. There are more and more evidence. There's something very important. If we review Spain, for example, we would find that a school breakfast, it's a public policy, because it's been proven that to have a good performance, a good school cognitive performance, it's important to be fed before. There are several papers that have have demonstrated that lack of attention in classes, hyperactivity is associated to malnourishment levels and to dehydration levels of children in the schools. There's also been proven that to a better food at school, there is a higher impact in school performance. And In additionally, there's also more assistance to school. We lived that during the 2020s, during the pandemic, consequences that we had when schools were closed. Not only was associated to stop studying, but also to and a worsening of the feeding for children that stop going to school, because not going to school, they missed those food, those meals that the school provided. And so the food, it's a high and very important element for parents to make the decision that allow their children to go to school rather than to work. And we cannot miss that. We should keep that in mind. We still see children jobbed, and that it's very bad. Having children in the workforce is very bad for them. But this is a result of the financial pressure that those families face. This is not out of ignorance, but out of need. The need that many families face. Children between 8 to 11 years old, so they need to decide whether their children go to school or they go to work, because sometimes they have between 8 people to feed as an average, at least in Latin America.
You know, Vicky, if I could also chime in here as we think about how we advocate on this issue more broadly, is, you know, there's a lot of research that shows that there's a real economic impact when families are going hungry. And I think that's often a critical message that we can share. Obviously, the research varies based on what country you might be in, but I know there's research, you know, certainly by country and globally, that speaks to the economic impact that countries face when their citizens are going hungry. And I think that's also a critical message to share. I don't think people sometimes understand the gravity of that cycle that we were talking about. So how can we continue to demonstrate and show that?
Thank you, Stephanie. That's really important. Let me just ask one last thing, which is maybe a nice wrap up. And Ana Catalina, you may want to take a stab at this first. If a food banker who's listening to this doesn't have a community school feeding program, how would you recommend that get started at the food bank?
Vicky, gracias.
Thank you, Vicky. Many years ago, we started in Colombia the healthy breakfast program. And we had several cities in Colombia really providing for 3,500 children, but that we cannot do it alone, that's for sure. So it's of paramount importance to really join forces between private sector, non-profit organizations and the government. We need to jointly face this situation and really to foster the government to also take action. What the the food bank Nigerian person was mentioning is that at schools, in the education institutions, we have people that receive the program, people that do not receive the program. So it's important that to choose. It's very sad to have to choose who to help. This shouldn't be the rule. We needed to jointly cover the whole educational institution. We really would like to really cover many educational institutions with several organizations that really give programs that are preschools, but sometimes this is not possible. So we needed to at least serve one institution, education institution, and allow the parents to decide whether they want their children to be fed at the education institution or not, you know, because otherwise these children of 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age, they are feeling from those early ages the inequalities in the world. And this is not fair. So I would say the first thing to say is to see who we are going to partner with. What's the education institution we are going to work with, or which is that nonprofit organization that can provide food to the schools, to see which schools we are going to work with. So first of all, to find the government that is working with that education institution. If they're already there, how we can really add our help, how can we complement that help, that program. And then I will not need to know what the children's are and what are their nutritional needs. And so I go back to what Juan Pablo said. Nutritional security has 5 elements. One of them is food culture. We need to be respectful of the populations we are serving, of their culture, to respect their diversity, their richness. There are bodies that nutritionally are not ready to receive some foods different from what they are used to. And this is very important. So besides that, I need to know how many children I will be serving, what institution I'm going to work with, and what are the meals that I should provide to that institution based on the support I'm going to provide. After that, I will go to look for partners, companies that can donate food, trucking companies. Maybe you cannot believe this, but to really how the products to their final goal, to the final spot, is very difficult, because sometimes these organizations do not have the money to pay for trucking, for the hauling about the products. And finally, we need to have know-how partners, people that will help us to transform on what to eat, when to eat, why is it important to be fed, how to have a healthy life, why is it important the sport, the playful time, this full package of partners. Let's give you an example. Many years ago in Colombia, we found a partner that gave us pens, pencil, colors, and notebooks. And when we provided this to the institutional organizations, we were complementing the food that we were already giving them. So this would be my main idea.
Thanks, Ana Catalina. Juan Pablo, I think that was resonating with you as well. Is there anything you would like to add to that answer?
Hay una cosa que quisiera
Yes,
agregar.
there's something I would like to add, is that it's highly important to measure the impact that we can have with our programs, because that's the way to really, give answers to our communities and to our donors, so they can understand how we use the money they provide, the help they provide. The cultural acknowledgement is very important, because our beneficiaries, our partners, should have the same measurement. They need to know that their help is really reaching the people that really need it. And so it's important that population, it's also related to the schools, the organizations that work with them. We have lived various events, tragic events, pandemics, but the people have realized that we really have a good networks that will allow us to keep on helping them. And this helps us that the program keeps on growing, and that the population itself defend and advocates for their meals, for the breakfast for their children, because they realize that they need the importance of their children to be fed. Sometimes what we need is that actually these children to receive healthy food, nourishing food, because sometimes children in our country, in Guatemala and in many communities, especially poor communities, they eat 0 calories food, junk food, because they just have sugar and fat, but they have no content of healthy food, no content of really things that the kids need. And so this is the impact that we have seen. Sometimes the available food is not what really can meet the nutritional needs of the communities.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. That's really valuable. Karen, is there anything you'd like to add from the Canada perspective?
I mean, I would agree that partnerships are really important. And I think, like others have said, is, having those conversations in communities to understand what the specific needs are, because, at Food Banks Canada, we're serving a diverse group of communities, Indigenous communities, but also new Canadians. And so trying to provide culturally appropriate food is a consideration, and also can be costly. So those are some things that are really important, is to have those conversations at the community level to understand what the needs are. And something that we also really focus on is offering our programs in a way that doesn't create a stigma for the children, so they know that they can access it. It doesn't necessarily look like it's, coming from a food bank. It's just, everyone has access to the same food, and they don't need to feel embarrassed or uncomfortable that they need to access that food.
I think that's a great summation statement. And I believe that is the time we have for today. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your knowledge and experience. It's been wonderful to sit on a panel with Food Banks Canada. Thank you, Karen. And with our partners, Desarrollo and Movimiento, Juan Pablo. Of course, always a pleasure, Ana Catalina and Stephanie, to have your partnership and thought leadership in this very important space. Thank you to the audience for joining us and for your excellent questions. We hope you take what you've learned today back to your communities and encourage investment in school meal programs, which are crucial to the well-being of children across the globe. For more information on starting a food program, a school meal program, and other resources, you can visit our website at foodbanking.org/child hunger programs. Thank you all.